Hello and welcome to the show that debates and deconstructs the hottest issues of the day. You're watching The Big Picture and I'm Athar Khan. The Reserve Bank of India left interest rates on hold today but cut the cash reserve ratio for banks by 50 basis points. A move that eases tight liquidity in the banking system and underscores a policy shift from fighting inflation to reviving growth. With core inflation still sticky, the RBI, as expected, left its policy repo rate unchanged at 8.5% for the second consecutive review. Since March 2010, the RBI increased rates 13 times. This was done to fight rampant inflation, as monetary tightening was seen as the best defense against inflation at that time. However, the efficacy of a continuous tightening cycle has been questioned by many experts, saying that monetary action wasn't really a choice but a compulsion. Inflation has moderated slightly in the last 2 months and is expected to settle around 6 to 7% by March this year, but declining growth has everyone worried. Not just India Inc., but the government as well. India Inc., on their part, has been demanding a cut in the rates to arrest declining economic growth, which is expected to moderate to 7% in 2011-12 from 8.5% a year ago. Even as the biggest challenge for the RBI and the government will be arresting the growth slowdown, inflation risks persist, making it difficult for the RBI in achieving low and stable inflation with minimal sacrifice of growth. Inertia in implementing reforms like the GST and the DTC to arrest the fiscal deficit, as well as the failure to reduce the subsidy burden, has added to the inefficacy of the RBI's monetary action. In addition to all this, growing concern over the depreciation of the rupee and the widening current account deficit has starkly underlined the need for policy reforms to improve investment climate in the country as well. Today on The Big Picture, we discuss possible RBI action in the coming months. We debate whether the time has come for a policy rate reversal and whether weakening growth will be a constant feature in 2012. What can the government do to arrest inflation, spur growth and reduce the burgeoning fiscal deficit? To deconstruct the scenario for us, we have an eminent panel in the studio. Right next to me is Maithili Basnurmat, consulting editor of The Economic Times. To my extreme, in the middle, I beg your pardon, is Professor N.R. Bhanumurthy of the NIP FP. Right here is Soumyakanti Das. He heads the economic cell of FICCI. And towards my extreme left is V. Raghuraman, former Secretary General, SOCHAM. But I'd like to start the show with Maithili, if I could. Maithili, do you think the RBI's decision to not to touch any interest rates today, but they did reduce CRR by 50 basis points, was the right decision? Nobody really was expecting interest rates policy reversal at all, but do you think they made the right decision today?
Absolutely, but I think even the cut in CRR was necessitated not really so much because they have fewer worries on inflation. I think they are as concerned about inflation as before, but purely because liquidity conditions are fairly tight, and that again is primarily not because credit is picking up, but because the RBI has been intervening to hold up the rupee, because the rupee was depreciating very sharply. So the RBI had been intervening by selling dollars. Right. And in that process, it had been absorbing rupees from the system. So because of that alone, I think they have cut the CRR, albeit marginally. So frankly, I think RBI's concerns are as much there as earlier. And in fact, if you look at the policy little statement little carefully, in fact, the RBI perhaps is even more worried now than earlier, because they clearly have put the ball in the government's court. Right. And said the government does need to kind of get its act together.
And they have been complaining about the expansionary plan of the government. If I could come to you, Soumyakanti Dosh, are you happy with this decision today?
Yeah, I think the cut in the CRR is a welcome step and it's actually a beginning. However, we need to look at the bigger picture. If you look at the RBI policy statement very carefully, you will see that the government borrowing estimates in the current fiscal, we all know now there will be a slippage in the fiscal deficit. There is now around 1,000 billion. So that is at least 100 basis points over the budgeted fiscal deficit at 4.6%. And the CRR cut is going to inject liquidity of around 320 billion. So whether the CRR cut is going to ease liquidity is something we need to watch going forward.
It's interesting you mentioned the fiscal deficit in the 4.6 figure. We'll talk about that later, but let me go to Professor Bhanumurthy first. Your thoughts on today's decision first.
Well, I think today's measures are is basically on the expected grounds, and nobody expected that there's going to be a cut in the repo rate. Having said that, as Maithili rightly pointed out, the inflationary pressures are still continuing. If you see the core inflation numbers, it is not less than 7%. And whatever the changes that we have seen in the food inflation seems to be very transitory. And there is a lot of predictions that the food inflation is going to go up in future. But again, as Maithili already pointed out, the fiscal issues are going to be much more important in the coming months.
Than the monetary
Yes,
action, would you
that's
say?
right.
Right. Let me come to V. Raghuraman at this juncture. First of all, I'd like to get your reactions on today's policy. Then I'll ask you another question very briefly, if you could.
Actually, it is on expected lines, though, of course, the jury was divided whether the CIR cut will be there or not. But the point is nobody expected any rate cut because inflationary pressures are already seen around. And second thing is that unless growth gets back and we are going to have more tax buoyancy, and the government receipts are going to be really made where it's buoyant, I don't think Reserve Bank alone can't do much. So I think too much pressure is being put on Reserve Bank while the big ticket items of reforms government has to really do. Unless you do that, merely looking at Reserve Bank, I think is putting too much into expectations into it.
Right, policy paralysis as the papers have been calling it. I wouldn't like to call it that because I'd like to say inertia. We'll get back to that. But let me follow up with another question. Across the world, even the ECB, the US, the rates, they have slashed rates. Even China slashed rates. You think the time has come that India did the same, or do you think that the set of circumstances is completely different?
The set of circumstances is totally different. If you look at the inflationary pressures, look at what's happening in Iran today. We don't know what's going to happen with the oil prices. And already you have got such a big hole which is on the under recoveries and the kind of things which are there, plus the depreciation of the rupee. So I think there's a big problem, and government doesn't have the guts to actually rationalize the petroleum product prices. Second point, when you look at the question of like the core sector like electricity, you find that there is coal shortage. Still you find that there's 11 million tons of imported coal lying at the ports because electricity boards will not pay for the higher rate for the imported coal in the tariffs, and it will not pass through. So we have several problems, and I do not think that inflation pressures are going to go away. Second, we are going to have this food for security bill, and today Supreme Court's ruling that you have to pay the minimum rates. Right. I think all these indicate that unless the growth picks up, government will not have enough money to really see to it that the social programs are taken care of.
Right.
And fiscal deficit will be under great strain.
Right, fair point, fair point. It's interesting what V. Raghuraman said about diesel prices and the food subsidy bill. We'll talk about all of that later in the program, but I want to come to you very quickly and ask you, that fiscal deficit target of 4.6% of the GDP, do you think that's just wishful thinking now? Is there any way the government can achieve that target?
Not at all, unless they do some fudging, which is always, governments have periodically resorted to various kinds of fudging. So that, of course, is always open. You can have off-budget items, like you have receivables. You don't pay for the oil companies. You show them as receivables. Don't show them in your budget. So there's no end to imaginative budget making, as it were. But if you go strictly,
anyone can do that, it's run of
but if you play perfectly straight, then you certainly won't achieve your fiscal deficit target. But what's more worrisome, Athar, really than that, is that your revenue deficit, which is what the RBI's policy also highlights today. They say there has been a contraction in private corporate investment. Now, normally, if government were to step into the breach and make public sector investment, that would kind of make up and ensure that the economy grew. But because the government's expenditure has been essentially entirely on the revenue side, and their revenue deficit is almost 91% what it should be for the whole year. So government spending also has not been there to make up for the drop in investment. And in fact, what the RBI policy says, what is interesting is that if you read between the lines, then the future that they hold out is far more worrisome, because they say that if this kind of thing continues, we're going to see growth falling even more and inflation where it is or even more. So we are very much near the brink where you could go into a situation of stagflation.
So it could be a double whammy
of sorts.
And that is
absolutely very, very worrisome.
Yeah, right. It's interesting, Mr. Raghuraman, as well as the other guests mentioned diesel prices, in particular petroleum prices. Do you think, in your opinion, has the time come for the government to deregulate diesel?
Oh, it certainly has, but I think because with the elections, we have 5 state elections, especially UP, all eyes are on UP. So if you raise diesel prices, then definitely the inflation numbers will go up further because it feeds in through transport costs. So I don't anticipate the government doing it now. They should,
right.
but they won't.
Well,
there are many things they should have done.
Let me get in Professor Bhanumurthy and ask you, do you agree with Maithili on the diesel deregulation bit? What about electoral compulsions? This government is a coalition government with alliance partners that are not always on board with their decisions. Do you think it's going to be very difficult for the government to do that?
I don't think there will be any discussion of the issue of diesel price deregulation at the moment, given the election and, as you point out, about the electoral compulsions. But I think there is some kind of, moves happening within the Planning Commission. If you see the Deputy Chairman speaking about that, and There are many other economic advisors speaking about deregulation of diesel. That is, there is no other way for the government to, other than deregulating the prices. We did some analysis on what will happen if you completely deregulate the diesel prices. But we did find, as again Maithili rightly point out, you might see some kind of a spike in the inflation in the medium term, but in the long run, you do have this positive impact on the growth if you actually shift this revenue deficit due to this diesel subsidy to capital expenditure. Right. In a sense, if there is expenditure switching happening from diesel subsidy to capital expenditure, then you do see that is going to have growth impact in the medium term.
It's interesting you mentioned the Planning Commission and something going on there. We actually will, on the show, we'll have to take a short break now. We'll take a short break. We will come back. We'll talk about growth and its revival prospects. We'll also see what Montek Singh Ahluwalia, Deputy Chairman of the Planning Commission, told Rajya Sabha TV with regards to growth. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Welcome back. You're still with The Big Picture and we're discussing the RBI's quarterly review. Before the break, one of our guests mentioned the Planning Commission and how they look at growth. In an exclusive interview to Rajya Sabha Television, Montek Singh Ahluwalia, the Deputy Chairman of the Planning Commission, did talk about growth. This is what he had to say about India's growth prospects in 2012.
Oh, I think we will essentially have greater financial certainty in the course of the first year of the 12th plan, which begins in April 1.
So you saw what he's still very bullish on growth. So are most policymakers. Do you share that sentiment? Can I come to you, Soumyakanti, first?
No, I think the growth prognosis in the current fiscal already, if you look at the last year numbers, the revision has been significant. 9.2%, then 8.5, 8, 7.6, now it's 7. So we'll be very happy if we get a growth rate of around 7%. Even next year also will be difficult, because going forward, I mean, the euro crisis is one of the factors which may pull down the growth rate. And if that's why there lies the policy reforms of the government. If the government shows some initiative and pushes the reforms, then we are going to have a very good growth rate. Otherwise, it's going to be difficult times ahead.
Right. If I come to you, Veeraguraman, you heard what Montek Singh Ahluwalia said. He still seems very bullish on growth. Soumyakanti is right. They've been revising their growth figures constantly from November. I remember it used to be 9% and then it came down to 8.5. Now it's 8 or 7.5 or something like that. What are your thoughts on growth?
Actually, if you look at right from 2009, our growth has been consumption-led. There has been a big investment lag. And if you look at today, corporates, including public sector, they have a lot of cash. They are not investing. You have coal shortage in this country. Coal India is flush with 55,000 crores. So the problem is, if you want to get growth back, you have to get investment. That's what he said. Instead of spending on revenue account, if government can really capitalize, we need to see that people start investing. And that is something which has to come about. And it was actually not was not given the right importance earlier, because inflation was the thing which people were targeting. And at that point in time, growth, we said that, okay, we can take a compromise on growth. But today it is biting, because when government started this year's budget with 9% growth and 7% inflation, you had the reverse, 7% growth and 9% inflation. So naturally you find that you don't have the tax receipts, and also you find the sentiments are down because of several policy paralysis and center-centric state coordination, environmental issues, land issues. I think we are in a real tough situation right now, and we have to get the growth back. For this, RBI alone can't.
Right. You mentioned that before, and fair point taken. But Maithili, he mentioned two most important path-breaking reforms, if I can call them, GST and DTC. Still stuck in limbo, nowhere to go, center can't agree with the states have a list of demands. If those two path-breaking reforms are still stuck, what are the chances for reviving growth in 2012? If those two can't pass, what do you see happening?
No, there are many things within the government's domain which it certainly can do, which are executive decisions. Clearly in the area of, say, like DTC, for instance, GST may be requiring a constitutional amendment, but the DTC does not. So that is something that the government can definitely do. Disinvestment, what's holding the government back? So clearly, I think the priorities are very skewed. At the moment, they're firefighting everywhere. The whole of this year, frankly, they were fighting against the corruption issue, Lokpal. On very trivial issues, government seems to be spending almost all its energy rather than on productive things. So I think that's what government needs to do. It needs to refocus. At the moment, I don't think we're going to see that happening, because until the elections are over, and the way we are hoping, most people I think in this country are hoping, is that if the government does very well, maybe they'll pick up the courage and go ahead with reforms. And if it is routed entirely, even then it may do it, because it may feel we have nothing to lose.
Right.
So either way, things are pretty bad. They can only get better. That's the only way of looking at it.
Right. So what you're saying basically is the elections are a big
Absolutely, yes.
obstacle in any policy reform, economic policy reforms, for any government, not just this government.
No, it need not be such a big issue, but for this particular government, certainly it is.
Right. Let's talk about the subsidy burden on the government right now. If the food security bill is enacted, it will add to the burden, taking it to gigantic proportions. How do you see the government managing that?
No, I don't think the government is seriously concerned about trying to manage that, because if they were, then you wouldn't see the argument between the national NAC and the EAC. The EAC, which looks at things a little bit more rationally, is saying that, look, we cannot afford it, or we have to cut our coat according to our cloth. Means if you want to do it, yes, no Indian would want to see any other fellow Indian go to bed hungry. But in that case, you must cut subsidies on oil. You must cut, where is the reason to subsidize LPG, for example? It is very evident that LPG is used by middle class or lower middle class consumers. They don't need a subsidy on that, but the government does not wish to do it. So if the government has political courage, you need to refocus, you need to retune your spending patterns, reduce wasteful subsidies and spend on the right things. Right. The food subsidy is a right thing, but you need to get your PDS, that is the public distribution system, in order. So that's what the government needs to do.
Absolutely. Let's get in Soumya Kanti here. Obviously, there's a school of thought that says subsidies should go. It adds too much pressure on the government on their account. But there is also a feeling that India Inc. says, what is the use for Manrega? What is the use for all these programs? The argument could be, if I play devil's advocate, there are so many tax incentives to corporations. Why shouldn't they go? What is your stand on that?
See, I think this is a very interesting point. Let me just digress a little bit before I answer your question on the tax incentives. I mean, if you look at the data very carefully, the government finance in the last 5 years, subsidies have expanded at the compounded annual growth rate of around 30%, and the government borrowing has been growing at 32%. This is clearly a departure from the 7 years from the UPA 1 started, when it was around 21% and 19%, if I am correct. So we are actually in a situation whereby we are financing our subsidies and all those non-planned expenditure through increased government borrowing. Now, coming to this, I mean, tax concessions, which you all talk about, if you look at it very carefully, tax concessions, if I go by them one by one, for example, it is around, I think, 11,000 crores in the budget. If I go at each of the factors one by one, let us take the issue of customs duty. Customs is typically the concessions which are, for example, around 50,000 crores is given to the gems and jewelry industry. But if you look at the gems and jewelry exports from India, which is 15% of the Indian exports, and if you strip off the gems and jewelry exports from India, the export numbers will look very, minuscule.
But answering the question that I asked you.
So that's why I'm coming. So these actually are not the enablers. If you look at the exercise are actually concessions which are given to the small scale industry. And if you look, and the personal income tax concessions.
You can't compare, say, Manrega to tax incentives.
So these are not tax incentives. These are actually enablers for industrial activity. Excise tax concessions are concessions which are given to the small scale industry in products like toothpaste, tooth powder. In the customs also, it are products which are actually going into as inputs for the gems and jewelry exports. So these are actually enablers for industrial activity.
Fair point. Hold that thought. We'll come back to that and lots more. Don't go anywhere. After the break, we'll discuss the depreciation of the rupee and what it brings along with it. Do not go anywhere. We have lots more coming on the other side. Welcome back. You're still watching The Big Picture. V. Raguraman, if I could come straight to you and ask you this. Going forward, isn't there a need to reduce dependence on debt flows and attracting more equity flows into the country, especially given the fact that last year we saw a decade-long worst performance by the rupee? And when I mean equity flows, I don't mean FIIs because they come and they go. I mean foreign investment, foreign capital. Isn't there a need to do that?
See, for that we should have a policy right, and also we should be clear. Now we had the Vodafone issue settled. Now that's a good positive sign. Similarly, you had the Kane Vedanta. It took 1.5 years for the M&A. Actually, we need to see to it that there is enough enabling environment in the country for a foreign direct investment flow. Second, we have really put a lid on the foreign direct investment in retail. We have done on the single brand, but it is done in such a way that many people are going to be really hesitant, because today IKEA has said that how are you going to source 30% within India? Maybe Starbucks can do with coffee. So I think we need to have proper enabling environment wherein people will be happy to come in and they should be able to get out as they come in. So if you get that kind of an environment, surely money will flow. Money is not the problem. The question is we should get our policy right. There are some states who have got good policies and we get investment flows there. For example, the state of Gujarat. We have less hassles over there. So it's for the state governments to put their act together along with the center, which should move the policies, then probably investments will be back. I don't think FDI is not coming to, in fact, people are eager to come, and this is the best market because we have got a very big market, we have high growth rates, and a lot of people are putting their, bets on India. In fact, they're disappointed. Last year, they had such a big hope. And, the end of the year, people were so much despondent, and people started actually saying BRIC, I means not India, but Indonesia. I think this is where we need to correct our own image.
Right. Professor Bhanumurthy, do you agree with that, first of all? And if you could answer that, I'll come to you with another question.
Yeah, I think I will go a step further. In fact, it's not just attracting FDI. You're not able to control the outflow of foreign investments, like, for example, Indian investment happening abroad. I mean, this is a new trend. There are many industries are sitting with hard cash, and they're actually looking for opportunities abroad. And that is actually worsening the overall situation in the system.
Right. Another follow-up very quickly. Let's go back to growth. Pranab and top policymakers have time and again said inflation is a problem because we have supply bottlenecks. How big a problem do you think that is, and has the government been actually able to work their way around it? What is the current status of our supply bottlenecks? What can we do to ease the bottlenecks?
Well, I think when they're talking about supply bottlenecks, it's largely in the agriculture sector. And, this is exactly what happened for the past 3-4 years. But I would say that it is not just because of supply bottlenecks that we have seen the inflation in the recent period. It is much more than that. Actually, if you have seen the fiscal stimulus measure that we have seen, as Sir is pointing out, it's purely consumption-based stimulus measures, which are not to be, you cannot really reverse it compared to any other OECD countries where the fiscal stimulus could have been easily reversed. But in India, for example, NREGA or Sixth Pay Commission, these are all cannot be reversed back, like for the farm loan waivers. They cannot really come, you cannot really revert back to the previous policies. Right, right. In a sense, there is a structural shift in the overall inflation price trajectory, I would say. It's in the price trajectory. And you have seen, sustained inflation for almost 2 years.
Right, right. Maithili, if I could come to you very quickly, changing tack completely, talking about OMOs. Open market operations. The RBI has been using it as instruments to ease liquidity in the system. They've also hinted that other instruments, additional instruments, could be used in the future. Any idea what that could be, or what way would they take?
I think there could be things like private placements possibly, but I think the RBI is not very clear exactly what it has in mind, for the simple reason they're not very sure when they might have to intervene in order to support the rupee. So they're keeping their options open because under the FRBM, the Fiscal Responsibility Bill, the RBI is not supposed to be buying primary securities. They can only intervene in the market through a secondary mechanism. So the idea perhaps is to groom the market and ensure that whenever the government comes in to borrow, they're able to borrow at a low cost of interest.
Right. Given the fact that their role is quite limited in the forex markets, do you see any more RBI intervention in case the rupee does do badly again?
No, that's actually very dicey for the simple reason that the RBI has always said that we don't support any particular level. What we try and do is to ease volatility. And given the fact that our resources are essentially built not out of trade surpluses, but out of capital surpluses, even our large, is approximately 300 billion, can disappear almost overnight. So it would be very unwise to really try to defend the rupee. So what they can perhaps do, which is what they had tried to do recently through having encouraging inflows from NRIs and trying to put some kind of restrictions on overseas borrowing. So I think their tools are actually, frankly, a little limited.
Right. We have very little time left, but let me come to Soumyakanti Dosh very briefly, if you could. Do you think March will see a policy rate reversal, and how badly does India Inc. want it? Very quickly.
See, March is the ideal time to go for a rate cut because, given the current situation, and if you look at the policy statement, the RBI has clearly said that enough is enough and has put the ball entirely in the government's court for a credible fiscal consolidation.
Right. So India Inc. obviously is waiting for that thing to happen right now. Professor Bhanumurthy, policy rate reversal March, is it possible? Is it going to happen?
No, I would say that I look forward for some more information on inflation.
Okay.
And then only we can decide on that.
Right. V. Raghuraman.
It will depend upon the election results, the way the government is able to present the budget, and also the manner in which we are able to look at the broad picture and whether we will be able to take some hard actions.
Right. I'll give the last word on the show to Maithili. I gave you the first word, I'll give you the last word also. March is when everyone expects some kind of action to be taken. First of all, how feasible would that action be if it is taken at all? And do you expect it to happen at all?
Very uncertain. The world today is far too uncertain for anybody to make any predictions through 2 months hence. So I think the best we can hope is that the Eurozone recovers. If that happens, yes. If it doesn't, then we're in for tough times.
Fair point, fair point. It's been a wonderful discussion. Thank you so much, everyone. Interest rate cuts may take longer despite slowing growth, as the 2-year low inflation number may be short-lived due to fiscal profligacy, as some have suggested, widening of welfare schemes and a weak currency. We'll have to wait till March or post-budget to be exact to see how this one plays out. Thank you so much for watching us today. I must thank all my guests, V. Raghuraman, Professor Bhanumurthy, Soumyakanti Dash and Maithili Basnurmat for joining us on the show. Until next time, till we get you another edition of The Big Picture, this is Athar Khan saying goodbye.